Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you for joining us today for our MasterControl hosted webinar. Today we're going to debunk some of the myths that come with digitizing. It's not as costly or as time-consuming as you might think. Before we get started, let me just go through a couple housekeeping items. During the presentation, if you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat function. There's an icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions today, go ahead and use the Q&A icon that's also at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions anytime during the presentation today. We'll go ahead and address those at the end. We have two great speakers for you today. We have Marty Smythe and Matt Lowe, both from our product team. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to them.
All right. Thank you, Jen. We appreciate you introducing us here today. I don't know about Marty, but myself, I'm happy to be sharing with you today, and I hope that you find what we have to present today useful in some decisions you may be making right now around production record automation in your business. In our presentation today, just by way of summary, we have new technologies in the marketplace with which you may not be familiar. They're faster, they're more affordable, allow you to get to a paperless manufacturing situation in a much different way than what you may be used to with traditional MES. Another thing that you can do, production records, training documents, SOPs, pretty much anything that you're using documentation-wise in your production process can all be digitized and managed under one platform with these new technologies. And the other point that we'll make today is that with this simple, affordable technology, you as manufacturers can easily scale up your operation across production lines, across different SKUs, in a much easier way than you may have been accustomed to in the past. So that's what we hope to convey today. Just by way of introduction, my name is Matt Lowe. I am the Chief Product Officer here at MasterControl. Have been with the company for about 15 years now. And prior to this, actually worked in the life sciences as a product development engineer and a product manager. With that, I'll toss it over to Marty here.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Marty Smythe. I'm our SVP of Go-to-Market here at MasterControl. I've been here slightly less than Matt. I've been here 4 years, but I have a broad-based technology background, and we're really glad to have you here today and talk to you about some of the myths and how we can dispel them around how you digitize your manufacturing environment and the cost and complexity associated with that.
All right. I think you've got this first section, Marty.
Go ahead I will go ahead and kick us off.
All right.
So, one of the things we hear from customers all the time and with our collective experience in the life sciences industry is the only option for digitizing manufacturing execution is implementing a manufacturing execution system. After all, it's named for the exact type of process that you're trying to do. It's been around 20, 30 years. But I think what we've started to notice is that there's this gap in the market where many manufacturers would like to go paperless. They would like to digitize their manufacturing environment. They would like digital production records. They would like to take the inefficiency and the errors associated with paper-based processes off the table, but they've been reticent to do so because of the cost and often the complexity associated with your MES systems that are out there in the marketplace today. So we're going to take you through how to look at it in a way and options that are on the table today that maybe weren't there a few years ago to help you address that very painful problem without going down the difficult path and expensive path of implementing an MES system.
Marty, one of the interesting things for me, having been in and around this industry for a very long time now, 25 years, I guess it's been, it's amazing how few people, even today, have digitalized their production record process. I mean, we see it in our own customer base.
I'd venture 60 to 70% of the manufacturing capacity in the life sciences market, that's across medical device, across biologics, across pharmaceuticals, is still paper-based.
Yep. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why here. Yeah.
One of the reasons to always start with why something hasn't been done is time and money. You know, the more expensive something is, the larger the investment that you have to make, the more cautious organizations are about what they do and when. It's easy to start to get into prioritization conversations and really start to talk about what can you continue to do in the way that you do it today and still try and minimize the problems. But you ultimately get to a point where everybody realizes that there are significant problems with paper-based production that they simply need to move on from. But one of the biggest problems out there is the cost and complexity of an MES system. Whereas if you think about, you buy software, you have your initial software costs, and those can be significant, and they're a major outline investment, and you have to build the business case for them. But you also, anybody who's gone down this path before, you have to take into consideration the long-term services costs associated with that. And with a traditional MES system, Matt, you've seen this in the market over the years, you're often talking 1-5 or 1-2 as a ratio of software to services. And what that really translates into is that, say you spend $10,000 in software, you're going to spend $50,000 incremental to that 10 to implement it, to configure it, to deploy it, and to train personnel on using it. If you think about that, that makes any software purchase pretty daunting. And that's when we're talking theoretically about 10,000 plus 50,000. Matt, that's probably not what we're talking about in most MES systems.
No, so we're off by an order of magnitude there.
Yeah, we're up maybe a 10x order of magnitude there. What's really interesting, though, as a couple of things have happened with the software industry, is the move to cloud-based software has really allowed some of the dynamics around traditional manufacturing execution software systems to change, to become much more palatable to a broader breadth of organizations and budgets and margins on your product lines. Because ultimately, you have a high enough margin on a product line, running a high enough volume of that product in a pretty standardized way, you can cost justify really expensive implementations of really fancy software. But that's not most of the industry. Most of the industry has to watch their margins. They're a little tighter on product lines. They've been going downward over the years. And they have to be able to be flexible about how much they produce, in what frequency, and the products themselves change. They can have changes from batch to batch, from order to order. There's all sorts of ways that it can be variable. So what we like to do is talk about how software today, a SaaS-based approach to manufacturing execution software, can not just go from 1-5 to 1-2, but actually flip the ratio entirely. We're seeing 3-1. What that means is $30,000 in software, that's a lot of software. You can do a lot with it. Only $10,000 in services and implementation charges.
I think we have a slide here that'll kind of illustrate your point.
Yeah, perfect.
There.
So instead of just watching my hand tear down like this, we can actually talk to some figures. And so if we look at $100K in software, if you think about a custom-built traditional on-premise MES system, that's $500K in services. That's a lot to take on. And if you're paying that much in services, it's taking a long time, because most services are based on hours expended to do the task. And so you have a lot of time, you have a lot of complexity, and more yet, the biggest problem is you pay that and it doesn't get the project as far as you thought it would get, and you have to double up and do it more, and you pay more in services to keep going. That got a little bit better with the MES systems out in the marketplace over the last 10 years. You start to see some of the newer ones, or some of the ones that have converted to hybrid environments, start to bring that down a little bit, which is good for the market. But what we're looking at today with a highly configurable SaaS approach to it is really flipping the paradigm entirely and getting to be where you really pay for the software, what you're getting the value out of day in, day out, and you have a much faster implementation at a much lower cost and really get the services part not off the table, but a much smaller part of the consideration set.
Yeah, complete flip in paradigm.
It really is.
Right?
It changes everything.
Yeah, I remember sitting in the audience at a conference, a medical device conference. Ooh, this dates me probably 17, 18 years ago now, and listening to one of the drug-eluting stent manufacturers talk about their own implementation of one of these systems.
Yep.
And what a lot of folks forget is oftentimes people will start down the path with a vendor and the implementation fails.
Yeah.
So not only did this particular example fail in implementation, they then went to a second partner, and I want to say that it was $10 million later.
Oh.
They got their system implemented and operational within their manufacturing facility. So
There's a lot of other ways a business can use $10 million.
yes, yep, it's a couple of orders of magnitude, right?
Yeah.
So that's really what we're here to talk about today is how do we change that order of magnitude and get it down into a six-figure kind of a thing instead of a 7 or 8 figure.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about validation complexity and the impact that this can have on rolling out this kind of system. Validation typically is going to get rolled up into some of the costs that Marty just talked about as part of implementation. But let's talk about the validation process itself. Because these systems tend to be so highly configured, tailored, dare I even say customized in some cases, it can make the validation process very difficult to do. Anytime there is an upgrade or some kind of a change that needs to be introduced, this becomes a much more difficult task. So when you're dealing with this kind of a validation framework or this paradigm of highly tailored systems, you're going to require a lot of people, a lot of hours. You're going to be reticent to take advantage of changes, new functionality that your vendor may be providing to you because of the cost of the validation. And it's just a spot you don't want to be in, because before you know it, you're sitting on a version of your manufacturing execution software that may be 5, 10, in some cases 15 or even 20 years old. Yeah. It's really hard to stay on top of your process when you're constrained in that way.
Well, I think we've all been down the road where the longer you go with something like validation, the more change that builds up across time, the more difficult it is to make any change, to make any upgrade, and it's a vicious cycle. It just keeps building on itself and being put off, which we're seeing that whole dynamic change, much like the cost and the software to service ratio. The ease and speed of validation is changing dramatically.
Exactly, and let's talk about that point here. Utilizing a risk-based process for validation, Marty kind of alluded to it when you talk about the volume of change. If you are taking change in bite-sized chunks, the risk that those changes pose to your process and your business is much, much lower, as opposed to taking 5 or 10 years of change all into the organization at once. So utilizing a risk-based validation approach is really important in staying up to date in these systems. MasterControl, where Marty and I both work, we employ a patented mechanism that we call VXT. That really facilitates this risk-based validation approach. puts the power in your hands while at the same time leveraging all of the testing and experience that we have across hundreds, even thousands of clients to really deliver a validation package that makes this much, much easier for our clients.
Yep.
Another part that becomes really important here is that change control piece. Again, if you're taking those bite-sized chunks, the change control process becomes much easier. We actually, out of our tool, output change control documentation. So once again, allowing you to lean on us as the vendor as much as possible in your validation process.
Yeah, so I think it's been, if you have two takeaways from what Matt and I just discussed, we've really been talking about barriers to adopting the software in the first place, and why many organizations have been hesitant or haven't been able to move forward with digitizing their manufacturing environment, digitizing their work instructions, their SOPs, their production records, and really getting to those outcomes, which is really driving why anybody is considering software in that area in the first place, which is the ability to have greater visibility into your production environment, not just at the beginning or the end, but in real time,
Yep.
which I think a lot of people can shake their heads, to, that it's a big challenge. You have a lot of work that goes into planning and production, resource management, and getting it all set up, your materials and staging those, and then you start the production process, and you're essentially waiting to get to the end and find out everything that might have gone wrong, which, it's amazing how efficient a lot of organizations have gotten and extracted a lot of, risk and inefficiency out using paper to do that, but there's so much more room to be gained that what we really want to spend the next section of the presentation talking about is how a more agile, more cloud-based approach to manufacturing execution software really changes how you do day-to-day production and what those benefits are.
Yeah, the last thing you want to have happen is a $10 million price tag where you're waiting months and years to see if it actually pays off, right?
Yeah.
So are you going to tell us about how this helps, Marty? This configurable, flexible?
I think one of the things you heard Matt say earlier was the word customized. And so in the MES world, if we go to the next slide, we'll see this area where traditional MES systems are customizable, but that's because they're hard-coded. And I think anybody who's been down that path with any type of software is that there's initially the perception of some real value in getting it exactly right to your organization and tailored perfectly to the processes you have today. But the reality of most businesses is that it doesn't stay static. It doesn't stay locked in time. Your processes, the types of products, the parameters of those products that have to be accounted for, the volumes of those products. Something is popular, something loses popularity, and you don't have as much sales volume on it anymore. You have to be able to adapt your business. And for all of us going through last year, 2020, was nothing if not a case study about being able to adapt quickly.
Yeah. How many companies did we see go from making perfume to hand sanitizer,
Yep.
or Gucci bags to face masks,
Yep.
or something like that? Being able to adapt with what's happening in the market.
And then you're even seeing the type of products change dramatically. So for those of us that focus a lot and spend time, or you that are in the biologics space, the oncoming kind of tidal wave of cell and gene therapies, when you start to talk about manufacturing those, especially moving from lab scale to commercial scale, you're talking about an entirely different mode of manufacturing, one that's really optimized around people, less machinery, more people, really around the flexibility of the process. You're not doing a massive volume of exactly the same thing. You're doing highly tailored, precision, even personalized therapeutics that start with a human cell, sometimes one individual cell, and moves all the way through a production process back to a product just for that person. If you think about that, that's a crazy change in the way that manufacturing has to happen.
As it brings a new meaning to single piece flow.
Yes.
Right?
And so what we really are seeing is configuration, like the ability to configure quickly, to adapt your processes, adapt your parameters for changes to the product and the way in which you're going to manufacture it become really important. And a lot of times you hear that, a level abstracted up from configuration is being very flexible in your manufacturing process, having an agile manufacturing process. But to achieve those, ultimately the system in which you're using has to be highly configurable. And this is an area where even a lot of organizations that have an MES implemented in a certain part of their manufacturing environment, say one plant or one line that's doing a high margin, high volume product, they can't scale it down very easily to other parts of their manufacturing environment because it doesn't have the configurability to be able to account for products that change quicker. We also see this a lot with, like CDMOs and CMOs. If you have a high mix of products, it's not that the products themselves are highly adaptive or changing parameters a lot, but you're taking orders for different product types and you're taking lines down, you're setting lines up, and you're being able to manage that. You need that configurability to be able to do that in the system. And that's everything from setting up your product parameters, setting up your process parameters, being able to set up your quality checks in your sampling and testing differently, being able to do the review by exception where you don't have to get all the way to the end and then re-review everything. You're able to be flexible and more agile because you're only reviewing the things that were exceptions to your process. Okay. So there's a number of factors there where configurability is becoming a new standard in the industry and something that the software has to enable, not restrict.
Yeah, I think back to my time in life sciences prior to MasterControl. Some of the companies I worked for, we had thousands of SKUs.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about a specification, and oftentimes the whole first page was just a table that showed all the different iterations and configurations of that particular product.
Yep.
If you have to tailor build a master production record for each one of those iterations, well, it's no wonder it takes years and potentially millions of dollars.
You might as well set up a sub-department in your organization that is doing only that if you're at that scale.
And I think there are quite a
Probably
few
quite a
folks
few
that are
that have that.
actually in that boat, right?
Yep.
So this idea of easy configuration is really important in the new world.
Yep.
And the way we approach things. So let's take just a minute here and talk about adoption a little bit. So one of the things kind of inherent in the design of software systems of yore was the machine-centric aspect of it. So the software was really set up to highly automate, often at the expense of the user. So their ability to understand it quickly, to intervene when needed, that becomes a very difficult thing with these older paradigms. It does, you kind of alluded to this, require dedicated support. So oftentimes you need at least one person and often a department of people that are supporting this system in your organization. If there are small tweaks that need to be made, that team may or may not be able to do those. Again, speaking to the configurability, they may actually have to call in an outside expert.
That's the thing, and if you're not doing it in-house and taking on those resources and those costs as internal costs, you're likely doing it as arrangements with third-party consultants or with extended arrangements with the vendor from the MES system that lead to what we talked about earlier in that 5-to-1, 2-to-1, 1-to-5, 1-to-2 ratios. Then you really see that not just end at implementation, but go on.
Yep.
for the total time that you own the software.
Yeah, before you know it, you've got a new coworker that doesn't work for your company. They've got their own desk, they've got logins. I mean, it's as if they're an employee of the company, but you're paying much, much more for that. In the new paradigm, really a focus around the operator and their ability to quickly adapt to the system. Things as simple as being able to do it on a tablet, for example, making sure that the design is optimized for those mobile devices. We have a new expectation now with the apps on our phones that you pick them up and you can pretty much figure out what it is you need to do just by poking around in there. That has bled over into our professional lives as well, where we want our enterprise software systems to have that same level of usability and intuitiveness. That's a tough word to get out there.
Well, it's interesting. This is one of those areas where, manufacturing over time has in some ways been reticent to digitize the actual operator, interactions and documentation, because one of the things is there's turnover at the operator level. It costs money to train, bring people on. There were some perceptions in the past that it wasn't exactly a tech-savvy workforce that was coming in and working on the lines. I think that's changed dramatically over the last few years. And we hear it from customers all the time about actually coming in and trying to bring in new people to work on the line and train them up on the paper process is less native to them today than it is to take them through on a tablet and walk them through a digital experience.
Yep.
They get that more than they get paper today.
Yeah. I mean, we all have
Yeah.
one of these now. Our kids have one of these, and it's just
Our
second
kids are
nature.
showing us how to use one of those.
Exactly.
All over
It's
again.
Shamefully, right? I think back when we designed our own user experience for our manufacturing product here at MasterControl, I had an ongoing bet with our UX team as to whether or not they could make it to the point where operators required no training.
Yep.
And we had this constant lunch bet going that, well, if they can do it in less than 15 minutes, I'll buy you lunch, and vice versa. And I'm happy to report that I think we have indeed achieved that. And it's something that people should expect from their software systems as they roll these out on the production floor.
So any of our UX team watching this is probably wondering where their lunch is.
Yeah, I still probably owe them. But all right.
So I think, we've talked about configurability. We've talked about, the ability to have it easily adopted by the workforce. A lot of that leads to the conversation of scale up. If, in the manufacturing environment, it's not really a top-down system implementation approach where we pick one and we roll it down across everything right away. They don't want to do that. You want to be able to start small, usually. You don't want to get caught in pilot purgatory. That's no place fun. But you do want to start someplace where you get a system change, manage the change management, and roll it out in an incremental fashion across your manufacturing environment, whether that's multiple lines at a single site, or for larger manufacturers, kind of a progression from single site, one line, single site, multi-line, multi-site rollouts. And one of the things that has been really interesting to watch in the market over the years with the MES systems is most manufacturers take that approach and anticipate that they will ultimately scale the manufacturing execution system across all their lines. That's what's in the business case that they present. That's how they get the initial budget, and that's the vision that's laid out. When you go back and talk to most manufacturers, and many of you have probably experienced this in some way, shape, or form, is there's a stall point in most rollouts of manufacturing execution systems in which they do get rolled out onto certain lines in certain sites, sometimes multi-site, but again for certain lines. where cost justification becomes this big challenge internally. What lines can we merit continuing to pay these types of rates at for both the software, which, initial rollout of a manufacturing execution system, we've talked in the past, using hypothetical 10,000, 100,000. Most cases, you're talking $1 million to $2 million for that first rollout.
It's pretty easy to hit a stall point when you've spent $1 million
Yep.
and you're 2 years into the process and you've got 2 lines
Yep.
automated.
You'll see the team talk about where they're going to scale it next, and you see executive management say, just get it working and optimized on the line that it's already on, that we're already paying
Let's
for.
pump the brakes a little
go.
bit, right? Yeah.
And so that scale-up dynamic is somewhat stalled in the market with a lot of the traditional manufacturing execution systems out there today. Not that they don't do a good job for certain aspects and certain lines, but the promise of scaling across the entire manufacturing environment is pretty much a fully dispelled vision at this time. It's just not happening. So what we're seeing is the need for, even in organizations with a manufacturing execution system in certain parts of their manufacturing environment, a need for a new breed of software that can help them really ultimately achieve that vision of paper being removed from every line at every site. And to do that, you're really talking about a change in the cost dynamics, the scalability dynamics, the usability dynamics. They've all come together in the modern approach to manufacturing execution software that is cloud-based, really focuses on the operator need, because how many of you have seen the pictures or the vision videos of manufacturing where there's no people involved? Odds are that's not your manufacturing environment. Odds are, and manufacturing across the board still has a high number of operators in the mix. There are some environments that are pretty amazing that they have gotten to almost a lights out type manufacturing environment, but it's rare.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that, especially in the life sciences, especially the highly regulated industries, we still see a lot of people on the shop floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be able to scale digitally in a way that's easy for people to adopt and use. And so I think that's really one of the breakthroughs with the new manufacturing execution. Something here at MasterControl that we've really tried to push is the ability for, if we deliver a software out into the marketplace, it needs to be scalable to every line at every site. That's the goal. Sorry for people that are in love with paper, but our goal is to kill paper. And we can't do that if we don't do it on every line at every site.
Mm-hmm. Down to the simplest products.
Yep.
We believe that there's great value in digitalizing all of it.
Yep.
In fact, I like the way this slide's laid out because it reminds me of something I heard from you recently. Yeah, that MES acronym, Manufacturing Execution Systems, really the approach we've taken at MasterControl is a new acronym, Manufacturing Execution Simplified. That's where I think the industry really needs to go.
Yep. That's going to be the game changer, is to be able to take everything we know about the benefits of digitalization, increase in efficiency, increase in time to market, removing errors, better data integrity, the ability to have all that information digitalized, which we're going to talk about in a second, in the form of data that's structured, that's real-time and streaming, allows you to make entirely different optimization strategies, continuous improvement approaches, the way in which you optimize both the people, the product design, and then the production environment itself and your processes is really, it's game changing.
Yep.
But you can't do that until you have the data. And if the data is locked in paper, we've all been through the paths of the manual extractions of that data and what it leads to in terms of projects never getting off the ground to really do the analysis, or how long it takes to do the analysis, and the diminishing returns that you get out of it if it's not available and in a format that you can use in today's analytics environments.
Yeah, I still get shivers when I think of bankers' boxes. They're usually stacked up on the mezzanine above the clean room or something like that, and it's just a miserable process to go through those
Absolutely.
and try to get data out
Yep.
of them. So let's talk a little bit about how you get data not only from your production record, but also the systems that surround that production record. We all have multiple software systems that we're running in our organizations today. And one of the difficulties we can face is the siloing of the data. And you really don't get the full benefit until you're able to bring it together in such a way that you can really surface insights that will help you better the business outcomes that you're achieving. Let's take a look at what a typical software system roadmap may look like within an organization. You can see we've put the production record at the center here, as that's kind of the topic of our conversation today. But you've got ERP systems or MRP systems if you are utilizing a standalone MRP. You see MES there. It's its own animal when it's communicating back and forth between the production record. Some people may have a LIMS system where they're pulling information out of the laboratory and in-process testing, things that may be happening there. The CRM system, where the product is actually going, what the order looks like, what am I building for this particular customer. Supply chain management software can be there, SCADA, IoT gateways. I mean, there are just an endless number of systems.
Well, and this is this may look complex and daunting, and this is a best case scenario where everything's digital.
Yep.
How many pockets of Excel, how many pockets of Word are actually in this mix, where it's not actually a digitized portion of the value chain?
Yeah, heaven forbid you've got access databases that are still floating around out there. I not being accusatory, but I suspect there might be some in our viewership out there. So what we see happen is we've got these inputs coming in, and when you're in a paper-based system, inputs come in, outputs go out. What happens in the middle there is it's like a black box, what our slide shows here. It's really difficult to improve your processes and become more efficient when you've got a black box. You can't figure out what's going on in there, where are the bottlenecks, where am I seeing trends that would lead me to a bad outcome. All of those things are just impossible to see in a paper-based world. Now, when you get to a digitized system, and hopefully like that first diagram we looked at, where your inputs and your outputs are all digitized as well as your production record itself, now you can really begin to change your business. You can identify the parts of your process that are resulting in quality issues, time delays, cost increases. All of those things become possible because the data is now available at your fingertips. And as you get more and more of this data and aggregate it in such a way with these other systems, you can begin to utilize some of the newer technologies like machine learning, natural language processing, what we know collectively as artificial intelligence, to surface insights that as a human being we would never be able to recognize. The volume of data is just too great.
I mean, if you think about that spectrum from the ability of humans to do this type of analysis when they have bad or disparate data in different places, it vastly improves when they have access to the data in structured ways. But there's ultimately a point in that spectrum where the ability to add these advanced technologies takes it even to the next level. And what can be done is really amazing.
Yep. I mean, and you think about not only being able to see just a single batch, but what's happening across batches for many years, or shifts, or weeks, or whatever you want to look at. It becomes much easier to slice and dice that data and really get into deep analysis of what is going on in your production process. Whew. There's a lot of talking thus far, Marty.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. I
Yeah.
think we're going to focus on a few things here towards the end of this presentation to really focus on some of the tangible benefits that this new approach or paradigm shifting approach in manufacturing execution systems, or as Matt mentioned, manufacturing execution simplified. We're going to talk through a few of the things that really jump out as immediate benefits that can change the way you're operating today, not in a few years, but right away, and make a really big impact. I think one of those first ones is right first time. I mean, everybody out there is looking for the ability to make sure that everything in the production run, all of the data captured, is captured accurately the first time. Not going back and fixing things, not going back at the end of a disposition and review process and having to go back and fix it. And these are such, little things. We're 5 months, almost 6 months into the year, but it's probably not too far off to remember the date change from 20 to 21 and having to go back through production records where, everything else was done right, but simply the wrong date put. I mean, there's little things like that a digital system that has built-in controls and limits takes off the table right away. And you start to see, upwards of 90 to 100% right first time. You start to see your data integrity really get under control. And if you think about, still how many warning letters are issued that mention data integrity on the shop floor as a major reason for citation, I think it's 70, 80% of the ones out there over the last 5 years. It's a big issue that can be taken care of and fixed really quickly.
Yeah, it's funny when I walk into an organization and I ask the production supervisor or maybe somebody in QA, so what does your right first time percentage look like? And typically I'll get a chuckle.
Yeah.
And that's when okay, it's not what they'd like it to be.
Yeah.
Why not take that off the table entirely and just get it right out of the gate?
And do it in under a month, not 2 years.
Yes, exactly.
Some of what Matt was taking us through in the black box part of the presentation really comes down to this work in progress visibility. The ability to see your status, see how your deviations are tracking, see how your production run is moving through and progressing in real time, and not having to wait till the end of a production run to know what went wrong or what was trending out of specification and all of those types of things that, basically, if you can fix it sooner in a process, the less impactful it is to your organization. And part of that is really the ability for these new manufacturing systems, cloud-based, being able to capture that data in real time, is to also offer them up the operational insights as real-time dashboards, or we'll say near real time. I think everybody feels more comfortable with near real time, and it is the fact that you can get it, and there may be some lag, but it's in time to do something with it and be able to improve the way that you run your business. Whether that's at a executive level that wants to check in remotely, whether it's a supervisor level that wants to see over the entire production environment and see what's going on, or at the operator level that wants to know how they're doing with their task and how they're progressing. That can all be served up in a role-based way in a very timely way.
Yeah, it's much better to catch a bad product right at the beginning when there's not a lot of time, raw material, as opposed to the end when it could be $1 million scrap price.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about next is, you really can, that next stage of being able to digitize, have better access to the data in a WIP environment, you start to be able to really look at reducing your out of specification, your deviations, and your scrap, which is where the dollar signs start to really go up. And so we've seen with the new approaches to manufacturing execution software out there that you can really significantly reduce out of specification, deviations, to magnitude of 25 to 50%, depending on where that we've seen customers across that range adopting this system and being able to put those types of improvements on the board. And scrap, the actual dollar amount varies so much by what you're producing, but seeing real improvement in that area. And we all know if you have to throw away less, you save money, you get product to market more efficiently, you don't have the shortages in demand. I think we've all seen, with the COVID vaccines, how significant a scrapped batch can be. I mean, that's really significant, not just to the companies involved, but to the population at large. And that's, if you're in the life sciences business, you're always thinking about both sides of the equation. What you're doing to improve the life of patients out there, and then how you're running your business. And this software allows you to optimize both.
Yep. Yeah, our data over the past 20, 25 years now tells us that on average in the life sciences, a deviation out of spec, heaven forbid a kappa, that's going to cost the company about $5,000. And even if you're pretty good in that realm, and you're only spinning out a couple dozen every year, that adds up very quickly in what you could be saving by reducing or preventing them altogether.
Absolutely.
I think this is your last one here, right, Marty?
Yeah. Then we'll talk about the optimizing the manufacturing operations. I think this is one of those areas where you start to get into the cumulative benefit of a software that not only takes inefficiency out of the core process of GMP documentation throughout the production environment, but also starts to connect into your QC environment and connecting to LIMS, connecting into your QMS environment, the ability to execute and launch quality events directly from the production line is really a big breakthrough. Training of employees and operators in the regulated environment. How much time are you spending training? How many tasks get done without the operator actually passing the latest training on it? How much time and cost is associated with things like that? And then you start to look at the efficiencies of integrating with your ERP system for your work order management and your materials management, being able to reconcile materials, the middle of a production run rather than at the end. You start to be able to look at your operations holistically and really start to optimize at multiple facets of that. You think of the matrixed nature of manufacturing operations. If you have pockets of that matrix that are offline, the data is not available until a manual upload, you're missing the ability to optimize the entire picture, or the lag time on that optimization is really hurting your business. This allows you to start doing it more in a timely way, in a more connected way, which will have outweighed benefits on how you run your operation from top to bottom. A lot of times you hear shop floor to top floor. That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a few points here where that optimization really starts to come into focus. This first point here is around cost-effective SKU management. I mentioned earlier that some of the companies I worked for, we had thousands of SKUs. As you begin to try to manage all of the documentation and process differences, material movement, there's all kinds of things that goes into that. It's one thing if you're just building one thing and you build it all day long, every day of the week. But there aren't a lot of businesses that are like that anymore. Being able to really simplify and reduce the costs associated with having many SKUs. Our customers today, they demand it from us. They have higher expectations of what it is we're delivering to them, and it drives this constant proliferation of SKUs. What do they call it? Mass customization. So this is a big area where one of these newer systems can really help. They need to have a good mechanism for dealing with product families. How do I get all of those iterations under that family?
Mass customization is not something you want to hard code.
No. You're going to run into problems down the road. That, or it's going to cost you way more and take far longer than you'd like it to. So this next one, being able to scale up and scale out. Again, we talk about, Marty mentioned it earlier, pilot purgatory. You get stuck in this mode where, yeah, I got it here on one line and we run it on one shift, but how do I get it to all shifts? How do I get it to adjacent lines? How do I get it to my site that's a couple states over or 10 time zones over? That becomes a real challenge with the old paradigm and the old way of doing things. That configurability that Marty talked about really allows customers to scale up and scale out as they roll these systems into their daily operating practices. Accelerated time to market. This is probably one of the biggest benefits that we see. If you can get your product out to the marketplace even a week earlier than you used to, depending on the revenue that product generates, it could mean millions of dollars in the organization's coffers that much quicker. Being able to not only get the product out there faster, but also do it at a higher quality really speaks to the mission of MasterControl. We aim to get life-changing products to more people sooner, and we strongly believe that these types of systems are one way to do that. You just tick down through the bullets here. Improve collaboration amongst the company, streamlining the process, reduce deviations, shorter review times. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with review by exception, and ultimately accelerating product release.
I think that, review by exception and, you hear the terms accelerated time to market, it can be talked about at such an abstract level, but the product review and release process is such a tangible example of time to market. It's literally sitting on the shop floor in quarantine or waiting for review to be finished and get released. And depending upon your business model, that's being able to get product to your customers. If you're a contract organization, it's meeting your delivery time frames. And at the end of the day, it's revenue. It's how do you start getting revenue back into the system and product out into the environment.
And if you have to meet delivery time frames and you've got product that's sitting in quarantine, cannot go out to the marketplace, you've got to build extra inventory, which automatically increases your working capital. And I'm sure we would all like to have more money to put in other places than inventory and working capital. I remember in the early development phases of this particular product at MasterControl, I was talking to one of our customers about product review and release, the batch review and release process. And I said, we feel like we can take it down from days to hours. And they looked at me almost incredulously and said, days? We're months in our product review process. I mean, that's just almost unfathomable, having to have that money tied up like that for that long.
Well, and if you think about some of these new cell and gene therapies, you can be under 30 days, 29 days-ish from the time that the sample's taken to the time that the therapy has to be delivered. You can't have a long review and release cycle in that manufacturing process. It's simply unviable.
It died. Now we move on to the next one. So it's just not possible. So if we look at some of the outcomes that we've seen through the implementation of systems like this, we've kind of pointed to this throughout the presentation today, but this really delivers it succinctly. Up in that top line there, 90% reduction in data input errors, data integrity. This is just the really simple stuff, the low-hanging fruit. No more missed dates, illegible signatures, data put in the wrong field. It just doesn't happen anymore. So really easy way to get efficiency gains there.
There's no margins in the software where everything's fixed and filled out around the edges.
No Post-its. Yep, definitely. This second one here is around increasing employee efficiency while scaling your manufacturing process. Again, having technology at their fingertips rather than having to chase down paper wherever it may be on the shop floor is just a really easy way to get efficiency gains out of your workforce. The next one here, 75% reduction in that review time.
Yep.
Again, this shows days down to fewer days, 3 days down to hours. Let's think about months to days.
Yeah.
That is a big change. And then this last point here is around the reduction in deviations. So again, some of this goes to the data integrity improvement up in that first point, but just seeing better product quality outcomes is a big part of implementing a system like this. So that brings us to kind of the conclusion of what we've talked about here today. Some of the key takeaways, maybe I'll cover the first one and you can take us out on the second two. How does that sound? I think first and foremost, do not fear implementing a system like this. It just isn't done the way that it used to be. $1 million price tags, years of implementation time, those are things of the past. We would encourage you to embrace some of these new technologies and get the efficiency that they can deliver in your business and improve the outcomes that you're seeing.
Yeah, and I think as Matt said, not being hesitant to implement this system, getting it in place, getting it operationalized, and starting to scale it, you're going to see amazing, impact to your business right out of the gate. Building on that, you start looking at the ease at which the new approach to software is allowing integrations across your organization, whether that's to your ERP, whether that's to a LIMS environment, whether it's into the QMS system, into a training management system, a learning management system. The ways in which you can add value to the core digital production record system and manufacturing component is really amazing. And again, becoming lighter weight, becoming easier to implement, and get that full ecosystem connected. And that's really where we start to look at, you've got something that's highly configurable, you've got something that's highly connected. You can really see amazing improvement in your production your KPIs, the metrics that you monitor and run your business off of. We're not talking, the little improvements. We're talking, really leaping forward in certain areas and then getting into fine-tuning it. But things that just weren't possible unless you were running a really high margin product at a really high volume and almost in a continuous nature. That level of efficiency and level of productivity and error reduction and everything is coming down to every line, every site, every shift, which is really amazing when you think about the impact that can have across your manufacturing environment and your business as a whole.
So long story short, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Get out there and get it done. With that, I think we're going to take a few questions here. I think Jen's going to join us and move to the official Q&A slide.
Yes,
here.
thank you, Matt and Marty. That was amazing. I hope that everybody out there got some really good information today that you can take away and apply to your own businesses, or even some information that can help you make the case to make that move to digitization. So we do have a couple questions that have come in. You guys mentioned review by exception. Somebody would like you to explain a little bit more about how that functionality would work.
So should I take this one,
Sure.
Marty? This one is near and dear to me because I've been through this process before in reviewing device history records. Yet in the old paradigm of paper, you get this packet and you go through page by page, field by field, and you check every single thing in there. With a system like we've talked about today, it allows you to do what we call review by exception, where the system surfaces problem areas and you're only reviewing the problem areas. You're not turning hundreds or forbid thousands of pages. You're just going directly to where the risk lies. taking care of those issues and getting that product into inventory so that you can ship it out to your marketplace.
Awesome, thank you. Next question, is it possible to segregate production data between sites? So for example, if they had to share some QMS information like corporate SOPs that have to be global and also plant-specific SOPs that are unique to a certain plant and team.
You want to take this one, Marty?
Short answer, yes. Yes, so there's, obviously there's data that you want to share and there's data that you don't want to share. And I think a lot of early iterations or perceptions around cloud-based manufacturing systems was that would be an issue, that you may get into an environment where you can't have that granular level of control over your data. We won't get too technical in this presentation, but there are a number of ways in which that can be achieved today, site to site. We actually have a number of customers that, while they have several manufacturing sites around the world, they treat each of them as independent vendors that supply the next site. So while you would think that you wanted all the sites to be connected and all the data to be aggregated and shared, they run those businesses as siloed businesses that don't need to or can't share a lot of the data. And so we've seen the ability to put this in place and have that level of control across the value chain, even within one organization.
Yep.
Awesome, thank you, Marty. So you mentioned implementing these systems a little bit faster than the traditional MES. In your experience, maybe how much typical time does a company spend training their employees, getting them up to speed so that they can work within the system efficiently?
Yes. In the new way of doing things, typically you're spending less time training people than what you, let's put it this way. The time that you would have spent training people in the old paradigm is actually the time it takes to roll the system out, to have it up, live, and going. I mentioned earlier the bets we had going with our user experience team internally. In the best case, there is no training required. The operator should be able to pick up a tablet, look at the production record, and know exactly what they need to do. In reality, 15 minutes is typically what we see to get somebody up and going.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about in other webinars that we've had is that configurable process allows you to structure your digital record to look almost exactly like your paper record. So when your operators come on the floor, they're not looking at something completely different. It is very familiar to them, and the processes are the same. So now it's just a matter of using a tablet instead of a clipboard.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to see with operators is, yes, they've come from paper to the new digital experience, and maybe the person crafting the master template has done it exactly the way they used to do it. And the operator might say, well, we don't have to do that anymore because we can do this, this, and this in the digital way. And so it's getting much shorter and much more efficient just in the process of rolling it out.
Well, I think you also see it upstream in your process engineers and their ability to learn the system, to build the templates and to build the records and to manage those. It's become much simpler at that level of the engagement as well. So those folks need training. Those folks have to learn a system as well. So if you can shave that to almost zero as well, you've really gained a lot.
Yeah, you don't have to be a software developer anymore to create a master record, right?
Yeah. I think we have one more question. Let me check here. Nope. We
That's it.
do not. That is our last question. All right.
Well, they let us off easy today.
I know. Well, I want to thank everybody out there who joined us today. I specifically want to thank Marty and Matt, too, for their time and their expertise that they've shared with us. If there's more information that you'd like to learn about MasterControl, you can always visit our website at www.mastercontrol.com. You can even request a demo there if you want to get a little bit more insight on how the software works. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.